So, Denmark. Elsinore Castle. It's the middle of the night, it's freezing, and guards are standing watch on the castle walls. And the story begins, to put it mildly, in a pretty strange way. One of the officers, Bernardo, comes to relieve a soldier named Francisco, and a little later Marcellus arrives with Horatio, a close friend of Prince Hamlet. So why are they all gathered on the wall in the middle of the night? Because for the past 2 nights, the guards have seen something deeply unsettling out there. A ghost. And not just some vague white shape in the fog, either. It looks exactly like the recently deceased King of Denmark, Hamlet's father. It appears wearing the same armor the king once wore in battle, walks past the guards, and then disappears. Horatio doesn't believe any of it at first. As far as he's concerned, they probably saw something in the dark, got spooked by the cold and the hour, and let their imaginations do the rest. That's exactly why they asked him to come, see it for yourself. And sure enough, while they're standing there talking, the ghost appears. Horatio, who was skeptical just a moment ago, immediately realizes this is no joke. Standing in front of him is the unmistakable figure of the dead king. He tries to speak to it, asking who it is and why it keeps appearing there at night, but the ghost says nothing and disappears. There's something else to keep in mind. Even without ghosts wandering around the castle, Denmark is already on edge. The country is preparing for the possibility of war. Weapons are being made, soldiers are being gathered, and security is being tightened. Horatio explains why. Years earlier, Hamlet's father fought King Fortinbras of Norway, defeated him, and took some of his lands. Now the dead king's son, also named Fortinbras, wants those lands back. He's putting together an army, and there's a very real chance he could come after Denmark. So the fact that the dead king has started appearing now makes the whole thing feel even more ominous. People at the time wouldn't have looked at something like this and thought, well, maybe we're just imagining things. They would have seen it as a warning that something bad was coming. The dead king is showing up in full battle armor. The country is preparing for war. You can see why everyone is getting nervous. The ghost appears one more time. Horatio again tries to stop it, practically demanding that it say what it wants, but then a rooster crows, dawn begins to break, and the spirit disappears. After that, Horatio stops trying to explain the whole thing away. They decide to tell Hamlet everything. After all, if this really is the spirit of his father, there's a good chance the one person it might finally speak to is his son. By morning, we're inside the castle. And this is where we finally meet Hamlet himself and get a clearer picture of what's been happening inside the royal family. Claudius is now on the throne, the brother of the recently deceased king, which also makes him Hamlet's uncle. But he didn't just take his brother's place as king. He also married his widow, Gertrude, Hamlet's mother. And all of this happened incredibly fast. So fast, in fact, that Hamlet has barely had time to process his father's death while everyone around him is already celebrating a new marriage. Claudius, of course, presents the whole thing as reasonably as he can. Yes, they're grieving his brother, but the kingdom still has to function. Mourning is one thing, running a country is another. And there is actual business to deal with because, as we already know, the young Norwegian Prince Fortinbras wants to reclaim the lands his father lost in battle to Hamlet's father. Claudius decides not to rush straight into a war. Instead, he takes the diplomatic route and sends messengers to Fortinbras's uncle, the current king of Norway, hoping he'll bring his nephew under control. After that, the court moves on to more routine matters. Laertes, the son of the king's advisor Polonius, asks for permission to return to France, where he had been living and studying, and Claudius lets him go without much fuss. Then the attention turns to Hamlet, and this is where things get more interesting. Hamlet is sitting there in mourning, surrounded by this newly formed happy royal family, and he's not even trying to pretend he's fine with any of it. His mother told him he needs to stop grieving so intensely for his father. Everyone dies, she says. It's part of life, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. Claudius also tries to speak to him almost like a father, telling him that grief is natural, but that mourning for too long starts to look like stubbornness. Hamlet had also been planning to return to Wittenberg and continue his studies, but both Claudius and Gertrude ask him to stay in Denmark instead. Hamlet agrees on the surface, but the moment he's alone, it becomes obvious how much anger he's holding in. And it isn't only about his father being dead. What really disgusts him is how quickly his mother remarried, and not just to some other man, but to her dead husband's own brother. Hamlet remembers how deeply his father loved Gertrude, what they were like together, and to him, what she's done now feels almost like a betrayal. Barely a month has passed. The funeral still feels recent, and the palace is already celebrating a wedding. This is where Hamlet's disgust with the world really starts to take shape, and it only gets worse from here. Everything around him begins to feel rotten. People seem far too willing to trade love for comfort, loyalty for convenience, and all those beautiful words about devotion suddenly feel meaningless. Right then, Horatio arrives with Marcellus and Bernardo. Hamlet is genuinely happy to see his friend at first, but Horatio quickly explains why he came. For several nights now, the guards have seen the ghost of the dead king walking along the castle walls. And not only does it look exactly like Hamlet's father, it appears wearing his old battle armor. That immediately gets Hamlet's full attention. He starts asking question after question, where exactly did they see him? What time did he appear? Did he say anything? What did his face look like? And of course, Hamlet decides he's going to the wall that very night to see the ghost for himself. Because if his dead father really is coming back, there has to be a reason. Hamlet tells the others not to mention any of this to anyone, and then all he can do is wait for nightfall. The story now moves to Polonius's home, where we meet Ophelia, his daughter and the young woman Hamlet is in love with. Her brother Laertes is getting ready to return to France, and before he leaves, he decides to give her a little brotherly advice. He knows Hamlet has been courting her, saying all the right things and telling her he loves her, but he warns Ophelia not to put too much faith in any of it. Why? Because Hamlet isn't just some ordinary young man who can wake up tomorrow and marry whoever he wants. He's a prince and heir to the throne, and his marriage isn't simply a personal decision. The royal family, the country, politics, all of that matters. So Laertes basically tells her, Hamlet may genuinely love you right now. I'm not saying he doesn't, but that doesn't mean he'll actually be allowed to marry you. Be careful. Don't throw yourself completely into these feelings only to end up heartbroken later. Ophelia listens, but she also pushes back a little, essentially telling him that if he's going to lecture her about virtue, he should probably remember his own advice once he gets back to France. Then Polonius comes in and starts giving Laertes advice of his own. Polonius is the kind of man who loves to talk and loves giving people instructions. So before his son leaves, he sends him off with a whole list of life lessons. Think before you speak. Don't jump into every argument, but if you do get dragged into one, stand your ground, listen more than you talk. Dress well without showing off, don't borrow money, and don't lend it. And above all, be true to yourself. Laertes finally leaves, and Polonius turns his attention to Ophelia. He's already heard that something has been going on between her and Hamlet, so he starts asking questions. Ophelia honestly admits that Hamlet has been showing her a lot of attention and has repeatedly sworn that he loves her. Polonius takes a much harder line than Laertes did. He thinks Ophelia is too naive and doesn't really understand how these things work. As far as he's concerned, Hamlet's words mean very little. A young prince gets interested in a girl, says all the right things, and then the whole thing can disappear the moment he loses interest. Polonius doesn't spend much time wondering whether Hamlet might actually love her. In his mind, the matter is already settled. Hamlet is far above Ophelia in rank, trusting this kind of courtship is dangerous and the meetings need to stop. Ophelia doesn't argue with her father and promises she won't see Hamlet anymore. And there's something important going on beneath this fairly short scene. Ophelia is already caught between her own feelings and the people around her constantly deciding what she should and shouldn't do. First, her brother tells her how she ought to feel about Hamlet, then her father simply forbids her from seeing him. And Hamlet, meanwhile, has no idea any of this is happening inside her home. Night falls. And Hamlet goes with Horatio and Marcellus to the same platform outside the castle where the ghost has already appeared several times. While they wait, music, shouting, and cannon fire can be heard coming from inside the palace. Claudius is holding another feast and drinking with his guests. Hamlet, to put it mildly, isn't impressed. He explains to Horatio that the Danish court has a reputation for loud celebrations and heavy drinking, and because of that, people in other countries tend to think of the Danes as a nation of drunks. Hamlet makes a pretty simple point. Sometimes one bad habit is enough to ruin the reputation of a person or even an entire country. You can have all kinds of good qualities, but people will still remember the one flaw that stands out. And while they're talking, the ghost appears. This time Hamlet sees it with his own eyes, and he immediately understands why his friends were so shaken. Standing in front of him really does seem to be his father, or at least something that looks exactly like him. Hamlet starts speaking to the ghost, demanding to know who it is and why it has returned from the grave. Maybe it truly is his father's spirit. Or maybe, as people believed at the time, some evil spirit has taken on a familiar form in order to lure him somewhere and destroy him. But Hamlet is already past the point of being cautious. The ghost doesn't answer. It simply gestures for him to follow, away from the others. Horatio and Marcellus try to stop him. They basically tell him, "Do you even understand what you're doing? This thing could lead you toward the sea, lure you onto a cliff, throw you to your death, or drive you completely insane." Hamlet goes anyway. Why? Because he needs the truth. His father has just died, everything surrounding that death already feels strange, and now the dead man himself has appeared in front of him and is asking him to come alone. At that point, Hamlet simply doesn't care how dangerous it might be. He pushes his friends away, even threatens them when they try to hold him back, and follows the ghost. Horatio and Marcellus, of course, aren't about to stand there and do nothing, so they go after him. And now the story finally reaches the question everything has been building toward. If this really is Hamlet's dead father, what happened that was so terrible the king can't even rest in his grave? Hamlet follows the ghost, and once they're alone, it finally begins to speak. It confirms what Hamlet already suspected. This really is the spirit of his father, the dead king of Denmark. And then it tells him something that completely changes the way Hamlet sees everything happening inside the castle. Everyone believes the king died by accident, that he was resting in the garden, fell asleep, was bitten by a venomous snake, and couldn't be saved. But there was no snake. The king was murdered, and the man who killed him was his own brother Claudius, the same man who now sits on the Danish throne and shares a bed with his wife. The murder itself was brutally simple. The king fell asleep in the garden as he often did. Claudius waited until no one was around, walked up to his sleeping brother, and poured a powerful poison into his ear. It spread through his body almost immediately, and the king died before he even had a chance to understand what was happening. In one move, Claudius got almost everything he wanted. His brother was gone, the throne became his, and not long after that, he married Gertrude. The ghost also suggests that something had already been going on between Claudius and the queen while her husband was still alive. How much Gertrude herself knew about the murder, though, he never says, and there's no reason to accuse her of more than we actually know. For Hamlet, what he's heard is already more than enough. He was disgusted by how quickly his mother married his uncle even before this, and now he learns that behind that polished royal wedding lies the murder of his own father. The ghost tells Hamlet to take revenge on Claudius, but makes one thing very clear: leave Gertrude alone. Let her own conscience and God deal with her. Then the spirit disappears, leaving Hamlet alone to somehow process what he's just heard. A few hours earlier, Claudius was simply the man Hamlet hated for replacing his father far too quickly. Now Hamlet believes he's a murderer, and he knows he has to do something about it. When Horatio and Marcellus finally find him, they naturally want to know what the ghost said, but Hamlet refuses to give them the details. Instead, he makes both of them swear that they will never tell anyone about the ghost or anything that happened that night. He also warns them about something strange. From now on, he may start behaving as if he's completely lost his mind. He may talk nonsense, stare at people strangely, act insane, and no matter what happens, they must never give away that they know there's a reason behind it. Hamlet is essentially deciding to hide behind the role of a madman. If Claudius really murdered his father, openly challenging the sitting king would be, to put it mildly, a terrible idea. But people might underestimate a mad prince. They might stop taking him seriously, lower their guard, and say things around him they would never say in front of someone they consider dangerous. Horatio and Marcellus swear to keep his secret, and from that moment on, Hamlet's performance begins. Some time passes, and we return to Polonius and his family. Laertes is already back in France, but Polonius, as you can probably imagine, isn't the kind of father who can simply let his son go and leave it at that. He sends a man named Rinaldo after him with money and letters, but also with another job, quietly find out what Laertes has actually been doing over there. And Polonius has a fairly sneaky way of going about it. Rinaldo isn't supposed to walk up to people and ask, "So does my employer's son drink, gamble, and spend his nights partying?" Instead, he's supposed to get to know people who know Laertes, casually throw out a few small rumors, and see how they react. Something like, "Yeah, I heard Laertes enjoys a drink now and then," and maybe the other person answers, "Enjoys a drink." He disappears every night, and nobody knows where he ends up. Polonius believes that if you give people a little false information, they'll often correct you with the truth. He's suspicious by nature, likes keeping tabs on everyone around him, and isn't about to lose track of his own grown son just because he happens to be living in another country. But what happens next is much more important. Ophelia comes rushing in, visibly terrified. She tells Polonius that Hamlet has just been to see her, and he looked awful. His clothes were disheveled, his stockings were hanging loose, his face was pale, and his knees were shaking. He barely said a word. He grabbed Ophelia by the wrist, stared at her face for a long time with this heavy, hunted look, then let out a sigh like he had about 5 minutes left to live, and walked away while still looking back at her over his shoulder. Ophelia has no idea what just happened, but Polonius comes up with an explanation almost immediately. He remembers that he was the one who ordered his daughter to stop seeing Hamlet, return his letters, and reject his advances. So now he decides the prince has simply gone mad from unrequited love. In Polonius's mind, everything fits perfectly. Hamlet loves Ophelia. Ophelia rejected him because her father told her to, and the poor prince couldn't take it and lost his mind. Polonius even starts blaming himself a little for having judged Hamlet's intentions too harshly, and he decides to go straight to the king and tell him what he thinks he's discovered. The interesting part, of course, is that Hamlet had already warned Horatio and Marcellus that he planned to act insane, and judging by this little performance, he's doing a very convincing job. Polonius is already completely certain he's solved the mystery. Meanwhile, Claudius and Gertrude are still trying to figure out what's going on with Hamlet. They can see that his behavior is getting stranger and stranger, but of course they have no idea what's really behind it. So they summon 2 of his old university friends, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. The king and queen welcome them warmly and ask them to do something fairly simple: spend time with Hamlet, get him talking, and find out what's really on his mind. Officially, it sounds like concern for someone they care about, but in reality they're clearly being asked to do a little spying. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern agree. Around the same time, the ambassadors return from Norway with good news. The old king of Norway found out that his nephew Fortinbras had been raising an army against Denmark, put a stop to it, and forbade him from attacking. Fortinbras changes course and decides to march against Poland instead, asking only for permission to move his troops through Danish territory. So at least one of Claudius's problems seems to be solving itself. Then Polonius arrives, absolutely convinced that he has finally solved the great mystery of Hamlet's madness. He shows the king and queen one of Hamlet's love letters to Ophelia and lays out his theory. Hamlet loved my daughter. I ordered her to stop seeing him, she rejected him, and that drove him insane. Polonius is so sure of himself that he proposes a test, put Ophelia in Hamlet's path, hide nearby, and watch how he behaves around her. That plan has to wait, though, because Hamlet himself appears. Polonius tries talking to him and quickly discovers that the prince is saying all kinds of bizarre things. The thing is, there's usually something sharp hidden inside the nonsense. Hamlet calls Polonius a fishmonger, mocks his age, throws out double meanings, and at one point even Polonius has to admit that if this is madness, there's a strange kind of logic to it. After Polonius leaves, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern come in. Hamlet initially greets them like old friends, asks how they've been, jokes around with them, but it doesn't take long for him to realize they didn't come simply because they missed him. He asks them directly who sent for them. They try to avoid answering at first, but Hamlet keeps pressing until they finally admit that the king and queen called them to court. Hamlet then opens up a little and says that lately nothing give him any pleasure. The world feels empty, people no longer interest him, and everything seems strangely pointless. How much of this is genuine and how much is still part of his act is hard to tell by now. Then a company of actors arrives at the castle, and Hamlet immediately seems more alive. He knows them well and asks one of the actors to perform a speech about the death of Priam, the king of Troy. The actor gets so absorbed in the scene that tears actually come to his eyes, and that hits Hamlet hard. Here's a man crying over a fictional story, over someone he never knew, while Hamlet knows his own father was murdered, knows who did it, and still hasn't done anything. He starts tearing into himself for being so hesitant. But then the same doubt returns. What if the ghost lied? Hamlet believes spirits can exist, but he also knows that an evil spirit could have taken on his father's appearance and deliberately pushed him into murdering an innocent man. He's still not willing to pick up a sword and kill Claudius based on one conversation with a ghost. So he comes up with a plan. The actors will perform a play about the murder of a king, and Hamlet will make a few changes. Adding a scene that closely mirrors what his father described, one man poisons a sleeping relative and then takes his place. Hamlet won't really be watching the stage. He'll be watching Claudius. If the king sits through the whole thing without reacting, Hamlet will have to keep looking for answers. But if Claudius sees his own crime played out in front of him and suddenly breaks, then Hamlet will finally have the proof he's been waiting for. Claudius and Gertrude once again ask Rosencrantz and Guildenstern whether they've managed to figure out what's wrong with Hamlet, but they haven't learned much. Yes, he's acting strangely. Yes, he says dark and unsettling things, but he still refuses to reveal what's really going on inside his head. The one thing that clearly lifted his mood was the arrival of the actors, and the king and queen are actually pleased to hear that, hoping the performance might distract him for a while. After that, Polonius decides it's time to test his theory about Ophelia. They leave her alone in a room with a book while Claudius and Polonius hide nearby and listen. Then Hamlet enters. He hasn't noticed Ophelia yet, and he begins thinking out loud. This is where the famous to be or not to be speech comes from. Put simply, Hamlet is asking why people keep living when life can bring so much pain, humiliation, injustice, and disappointment. Death, in theory, could put an end to all of it. The problem is that no one knows what comes after. And it's that fear of the unknown that makes people endure the suffering they already know rather than step into something no one has ever returned from to explain. Then Hamlet notices Ophelia. She tries to give back the gifts he once gave her, saying she can no longer keep them. Hamlet first asks whether she's honest and beautiful, then suddenly says that he once loved her, only to turn around a moment later and say he never did. It's difficult to tell where the performance ends, where the anger begins, and where he might actually be saying what he feels. But it's worth remembering that Hamlet already suspects people are constantly watching and spying on him, and there's a good chance he realizes this meeting may have been arranged as well. So he starts saying cruel things to Ophelia, telling her to go to a convent and never marry because people are sinful, men lie, women pretend, and he himself is no better than anyone else. For Ophelia, of course, this is devastating. Not long ago, this man was writing her love letters, and now he's standing in front of her almost deliberately tearing apart everything they once had. After Hamlet leaves, Ophelia is completely broken. She feels as if she has just watched the brilliant mind she once knew fall apart in front of her. But the most important part comes afterward, between Claudius and Polonius. Polonius still clings to his theory and insists that love is the cause of Hamlet's condition. Claudius no longer believes that. He listened carefully, and what he heard didn't sound like a man who had simply gone mad over a woman. There's something behind Hamlet's words, some kind of purpose, and that makes the king deeply uneasy. Claudius becomes convinced that Hamlet is up to something, so he decides to get him away from court as soon as possible and send him to England. Polonius asks for one more chance first, let Gertrude speak to her son alone while he hides nearby and listens to the conversation. By evening, the actors are getting ready for the performance, and before it begins, Hamlet takes a moment to tell them not to overdo it. He doesn't want shouting, wild gestures, or the kind of exaggerated acting that makes everything feel fake. He wants the scene to feel natural. Why? Because for Hamlet, this play isn't really entertainment at all. It's a test, and he needs Claudius's reaction to be genuine, not a response to some badly acted spectacle. Before the performance starts, Hamlet asks Horatio to sit where he can get a clear view of the king and watch him especially closely during the murder scene. Hamlet plans to do the same. The king, the queen, Polonius, Ophelia, and the rest of the court gather in the hall. Hamlet keeps up his strange behavior, joking, making suggestive remarks to Ophelia, and generally acting in a way that makes it impossible for anyone to know what he's really thinking. The performance begins with a short silent scene. One man falls asleep, another creeps up to him, pours poison into his ear, and then wins over his wife. After that, the actual play starts. Hamlet deliberately calls it the Mousetrap, and the name is pretty much perfect. Claudius is the mouse, and the trap is the story of his own crime being played out right in front of him. Hamlet even keeps commenting on the action as it unfolds, putting more and more pressure on the king by explaining who is killing whom and what is about to happen next. Then the actor approaches the sleeping ruler and prepares to pour poison into his ear, and Claudius can't take it anymore. He suddenly stands up, orders the performance stopped, and leaves the room. That's it. For Hamlet, that reaction is enough. He looks at Horatio. Horatio saw it too, and now both of them understand that the ghost was almost certainly telling the truth. After the performance, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern approach Hamlet again. They tell him the king is furious and that the queen wants to speak with him immediately. By now, Hamlet fully understands that his old friends are working for Claudius, so he stops even pretending otherwise and openly mocks them. He picks up a flute and asks one of them to play it. The man says he doesn't know how. Hamlet's point is simple. Interesting. You can't play a basic instrument, but you think you can play me. You think you can press the right buttons, pull out my secrets, figure out what I'm thinking, and carry it all back to the king. It's not going to happen. After the play, the situation has changed completely. Until now, Hamlet still had doubts about whether Claudius really murdered his father. Now, those doubts are almost gone. After the performance, Claudius understands that things are becoming dangerous. Hamlet clearly isn't just wandering around the palace pretending to be insane anymore. He knows something, or at the very least he has come dangerously close to the truth. So the king decides not to wait any longer and orders Hamlet sent to England with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Officially, once again, everything sounds perfectly respectable. Hamlet needs a change of scenery, the trip may do him good, and so on. In reality, Claudius simply wants to get rid of someone he is beginning to fear. After that, the king is left alone, and for the first time we see him not as a confident ruler, but as a man who fully understands what he has done. He tries to pray and admits to himself that yes, he murdered his brother, took his crown, and married his wife. So by this point, there really is no doubt left at all. The problem is that Claudius can't truly repent. Real repentance isn't just saying, "Forgive me." It means giving up what you gained through the crime. And Claudius has no intention of giving up the throne, Gertrude, or his power. He wants forgiveness for the sin while keeping everything the sin gave him. Then Hamlet enters the room. Claudius is right there in front of him, alone, unguarded, on his knees. It is about as perfect an opportunity for revenge as Hamlet could ask for. He draws his weapon and is ready to kill him, but then he stops. Hamlet's reasoning goes something like this: my father died suddenly without any chance to confess his sins or prepare for death, but if I kill Claudius now while he's praying, he might actually go to heaven. And what kind of revenge would that be? So Hamlet decides to wait until Claudius is doing something sinful, drinking, raging, lying, or anything else that would make his death feel more like punishment, and kill him then. The irony is that Hamlet doesn't know the most important part. Claudius's prayer isn't working at all. Claudius himself knows he cannot truly repent because he refuses to give up the things he murdered his brother to obtain. So Hamlet has just had the chance to end the entire story in one stroke. And once again he delays his revenge because he spends too much time thinking about exactly how that revenge should happen. Hamlet goes to see his mother, who demanded to speak with him immediately after the play. But the conversation is rigged from the start. Polonius is already hiding behind a curtain in the queen's room so he can listen to everything, while Gertrude is supposed to figure out what's really going on with her son. Hamlet arrives already furious. He knows Claudius is a murderer, he has just finally confirmed it, and now he's standing in front of the woman who married that man almost immediately after his father's death. Gertrude begins by telling Hamlet that he has deeply offended the king, and Hamlet immediately fires back that she is the one who has offended his father. From there, the conversation turns ugly very quickly. Hamlet practically forces his mother to look at what she has done. This was his father, a strong and worthy king, and this is Claudius, his brother, a man who doesn't even come close. And you. Hamlet tells her, traded one for the other. Gertrude starts becoming frightened, not just by what he's saying, but by Hamlet himself. He's agitated, angry, moving closer to her, and at some point she begins to think her own son might actually hurt her, so she calls for help. Polonius panics behind the curtain and shouts as well. Hamlet hears the voice, assumes Claudius is hiding there, draws his sword, and stabs through the fabric several times. But when he pulls the curtain aside, it's Polonius lying dead on the floor. Hamlet has just accidentally killed the father of Ophelia and Laertes. He realizes what he has done, but that still doesn't end the conversation with his mother. Instead, he goes right back to the point he was making and tells her she cannot keep living with Claudius as if none of this matters. Then the ghost of Hamlet's father appears again. Hamlet can see it and speaks to it, but Gertrude sees absolutely nothing. From her point of view, the situation now looks even worse. Her son is standing beside the body of a man he has just killed and talking to empty air. At that point, she becomes convinced that Hamlet really has lost his mind. The ghost reminds Hamlet that his real task is to take revenge on Claudius, not torment his mother, and tells him to show her some mercy. After the ghost disappears, Hamlet tries to convince Gertrude that he isn't insane and knows exactly what he's doing. He asks her not to tell Claudius everything she has heard, and especially not to reveal that much of his madness is an act. Hamlet also tells her that the king is sending him to England with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. He no longer trusts either of them and suspects there may be something dangerous behind the trip, but he plans to go anyway and see what Claudius is really up to. Then Hamlet takes Polonius's body and carries it out of the room. Gertrude goes straight to Claudius and tells him what happened. She doesn't reveal everything she discussed with Hamlet, but she gives him the main fact. In a violent outburst, Hamlet killed Polonius while he was hiding behind the curtain. Claudius is shocked, of course, but the first person he thinks about is himself. If he had been standing behind that curtain instead of Polonius, Hamlet could just as easily have killed the king. And that changes everything for Claudius. Until now, Hamlet has been an uncomfortable problem, someone who knows too much and behaves in ways Claudius can't predict. Now he is an actual threat. The problem is that Claudius can't simply arrest the prince and have him executed. Hamlet is popular with the people, Gertrude loves him, and Claudius can't exactly explain in public why he needs Hamlet gone without raising even more questions. So he decides he has to move quickly and carefully. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are sent to find Hamlet and recover Polonius's body, while the prince himself needs to be removed from Denmark as soon as possible. For Claudius, the trip to England is no longer just a convenient way to get his troublesome nephew out of the castle for a while. He wants Hamlet gone for good, preferably far away from Denmark, and preferably by someone else's hand. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern find Hamlet and demand to know where he put Polonius's body. But Hamlet isn't even pretending to talk to them like old friends anymore. He knows exactly who they work for now, so he answers with mockery and deliberately refuses to give them a straight answer. Polonius's body, he says, is already returning to the earth because that's where everyone ends up eventually, whether he's a king or a royal advisor. Hamlet even compares Rosencrantz to a sponge. He soaks up the king's favors, orders, and secrets, does whatever Claudius needs him to do. And when the king no longer has any use for him, he'll simply squeeze him dry and throw him away. Whatever friendship once existed between them is basically gone by now. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern quickly realize one thing. Hamlet isn't going to tell them anything willingly. So they take him to Claudius and let the king deal with him himself. Hamlet is brought before Claudius, and the king immediately demands to know where Polonius's body is. Instead of giving him a straight answer, Hamlet starts mocking him again. First he says that Polonius is at supper, just not the kind where he's the one doing the eating. He's the one being eaten. The body is somewhere out there, in other words, and the Worms are already doing their work. Claudius, unsurprisingly, has no patience for any of this and tells him to answer properly. Hamlet finally says that he hid the body near the stairs by the gallery where the king's men can find it. Claudius then tells Hamlet that he is leaving for England immediately. To everyone else, it still looks like a way to get the prince out of court for a while and let things settle down. But once Hamlet leaves, Claudius reveals what the trip is really about. He is sending a letter to the English king along with Hamlet, ordering him to have the prince killed as soon as he arrives. Claudius is confident the English won't refuse because Denmark still has enough political leverage over them to make that kind of demand. The plan is simple. Killing Hamlet inside the palace is too risky. The public could turn against Claudius. Gertrude would never accept it. So he wants Hamlet sent far away and quietly disposed of before he can ever come back. On the way to England, Hamlet comes across Fortinbras' army. Remember the young Norwegian prince from the beginning of the story, the one who wanted to reclaim the lands his father had lost. He was forbidden from going to war with Denmark, so now he is marching his soldiers through Danish territory on his way to fight Poland instead. Hamlet asks one of the officers what the campaign is even about, and the answer is almost ridiculous. They're going to fight over a tiny piece of land that is barely worth anything and that no one really needs. Hundreds, maybe thousands of men are prepared to kill and die over territory that probably isn't even worth the cost of the war itself. And that really gets to Hamlet. He looks at Fortinbras and thinks this man is willing to march an entire army into battle over a strip of land and a question of honor. While I know my father was murdered, I know the murderer is sitting on his throne and sleeping beside my mother. And I'm still standing around thinking, doubting, and delaying. Once again, Hamlet gets angry with himself. Unlike these soldiers, he actually has a very real reason to act, but he keeps searching for one more piece of proof, one more perfect moment, one more reason to wait. After seeing Fortinbras' army, Hamlet decides he can't keep going like this. If men are willing to die for almost nothing, then he has even less excuse to keep thinking forever instead of finally doing something, while Hamlet is away from Denmark. Things inside the palace start falling apart completely. Ophelia breaks under the weight of everything that has happened. Her father is dead, killed by the man she loved, Hamlet himself is gone, and she simply can't handle it anymore. She wanders through the castle singing strange songs, speaking in fragments, talking about her father, love, death, and half-remembered stories, and everyone around her can see that something is seriously wrong. At first, Gertrude doesn't even want to see her, but Horatio warns her that Ophelia is saying all kinds of things in public. People are listening, everyone is putting their own meaning into her words, and the country is already tense enough. Polonius is dead, Hamlet has been sent away, rumors are spreading around the king, and in a situation like that, even a confused song can quickly become a political problem. Gertrude finally agrees to meet Ophelia and finds a completely different person in front of her. Ophelia hands out imaginary flowers, sings about funerals and betrayed love, and then wanders off again just as suddenly as she came. But Claudius's problems are only beginning. Laertes has returned from France after hearing about his father's death, and he hasn't come back alone. A crowd follows him to the castle, angry enough that some of them are already shouting that Laertes should be made king. Laertes storms into the palace and demands to know who killed Polonius. He has no interest in investigations, ceremonies, or any of the usual court nonsense. He wants the person responsible. Claudius is suddenly in a dangerous position. The armed and furious son of his murdered advisor is standing in front of him, and there's an angry crowd just outside. But Claudius quickly gets himself under control and tells Laertes that he had nothing to do with Polonius's death and is willing to explain everything. Then Ophelia appears again. Laertes was already furious when he arrived, but seeing his sister like this pushed him even further. Not long ago, he had a father and a healthy sister. Now his father is dead, Ophelia has lost her mind, and all of it happened while he was away. Claudius immediately understands that a man this angry is much more useful as an ally than an enemy. So he offers to tell Laertes the full story and promises to help him get the truth, while Claudius is trying to calm Laertes inside the palace. Horatio unexpectedly receives a letter from Hamlet. Sailors bring it to him, and the story inside is pretty strange. Hamlet writes that while his ship was sailing to England, it encountered pirates. There was a chase, then a fight, and somehow Hamlet ended up almost alone aboard the pirate ship. For whatever reason, the pirates didn't kill him or sell him. Instead, they treated him surprisingly well. Hamlet even says they did him a favor and now expect something in return. The most important part is that Hamlet is no longer on his way to England. He is already back in Denmark. He asks Horatio to come to him as soon as possible and also give him separate letters to deliver to the king. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, meanwhile, are continuing on to England without him. So Claudius's plan, which was supposed to send Hamlet out of the country and get rid of him far from Denmark, is suddenly falling apart in a way the king never saw coming. Meanwhile, Claudius continues his conversation with Laertes and gets straight to the point. Hamlet was the one who killed Polonius. Claudius explains that the only reason he didn't punish the prince immediately is that Gertrude loves her son deeply, and the people of Denmark are fond of Hamlet as well. Simply arresting him and having him executed could create even bigger problems. That's more than enough for Laertes. He came home already wanting revenge, and now he has a specific person to blame for both his father's death and his sister's collapse. Then Claudius receives a letter from Hamlet, and this comes as a serious surprise. The man he sent to England expecting him never to return is writing to say that he is already back in Denmark and plans to appear at the palace the next day. Claudius realizes he can't simply put Hamlet on another ship and try the same thing again, so he and Laertes come up with a different plan. Laertes is known as an excellent fencer, and Hamlet will almost certainly agree to what looks like a friendly match if it's presented the right way. On the surface, it will just be court entertainment, a fencing bout, a wager, a few spectators. The difference is that Laertes won't use a blunted practice weapon. He'll use a real blade, and he'll coat the tip with a powerful poison. One small scratch should be enough. Claudius even prepares a backup plan in case Hamlet somehow avoids being wounded. He'll offer him a cup of wine that has also been poisoned. They're leaving as little to chance as possible. One way or another, Hamlet is supposed to die. And while they're discussing all of this, Gertrude arrives with even worse news. Ophelia is dead. She'd been by the river making garlands of flowers and tried to hang them from the branches of a willow tree. The branch broke and Ophelia fell into the water. For a while, her dress kept her afloat, and she even continued singing as if she didn't fully understand what was happening, but eventually the fabric became soaked, dragged her down, and no one reached her in time. Laertes was already barely holding himself together after losing his father and seeing what had happened to his sister. Now he learns that Ophelia is gone too. He leaves completely shattered, and Claudius understands that Lartz's desire for revenge against Hamlet has just become even stronger. Hamlet returns to Denmark and ends up at a graveyard with Horatio, where two grave diggers are digging a fresh grave. The men are arguing over whether the dead woman should even receive a proper Christian burial if there's a chance she deliberately drowned herself. Hamlet doesn't yet know who the grave is for, so he simply watches them work. One of the grave diggers casually tosses old bones and skulls out of the ground, and Hamlet starts thinking about something fairly simple. No matter who you were in life, everyone ends up in roughly the same place. Here's a skull. Maybe it belonged to a rich man, a judge, a courtier, some clever politician, anyone at all, and now it's being tossed aside with a shovel. Then the grave digger showed him another skull and says it belonged to Yorick, the former court jester. And this time Hamlet actually knew the man. Yorick used to carry him on his back when he was a child, play with him, make him laugh, and Hamlet remembers him vividly as a living person. Now all that's left is a skull. Hamlet holds it in his hands and remembers how funny Yorick was, how often he made people laugh, and how strange it is to see him reduced to this. Not long after, a funeral procession approaches, and only then does Hamlet realize who is being buried. It's Ophelia. Laertes is devastated by her death, and at one point he jumps into the grave, embraces his sister's body, and says they should bury him with her. Hamlet, who has been standing back and keeping himself hidden, can't take it anymore. He steps forward and declares that he loved Ophelia more than 40,000 brothers ever could. Laertes, naturally, has no interest in hearing this after everything that has happened. As far as he is concerned, the man standing in front of him killed his father, drove his sister into madness, and now has the nerve to show up at her funeral talking about love. The two of them start fighting right there beside the grave and have to be pulled apart. Hamlet, for his part, genuinely doesn't understand why Laertes sees him only as an enemy. He knows he behaved terribly and caused damage that can never be undone, but he never wanted anything like this to happen to Ophelia. Claudius watches the whole thing from the sidelines and quietly reminds Laertes to control himself. Their plan is still in place, and the king doesn't want him ruining it before the right moment. After the funeral, Hamlet tells Horatio what really happened on the voyage to England. One night aboard the ship, he couldn't sleep, so he went through Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's belongings and found the sealed letter Claudius had sent to the English king. The message was completely clear. As soon as Hamlet arrived in England, he was to be executed. Claudius never intended to give him any chance of coming back. Hamlet doesn't hesitate for long. He rewrites the letter and changes the order so that the men carrying it, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, are the ones to be executed instead. Then he seals it with the royal seal so no one will suspect anything and puts it back. Horatio is a little stunned by how far all of this has gone, but Hamlet says he doesn't feel much guilt over what happened to his former friends. They willingly chose to work for Claudius, spy on him, and escort him toward his death without ever seriously questioning what they were part of. What troubles Hamlet much more is Laertes. He realizes that Laertes has lost both his father and his sister largely because of him, and he admits that he went too far at the graveyard. In some ways, Hamlet even sees himself in Laertes. Both of them lost their fathers, both of them want revenge, but Laertes acts immediately while Hamlet has spent most of the story hesitating. Then a courtier named Osric arrives and tells Hamlet that the king has arranged a wager. Claudius has bet several expensive Arabian horses that Hamlet can hold his own against Laertes in a friendly fencing match. Hamlet agrees, even though right before the fight he gets a very bad feeling about it. Horatio actually suggests backing out, but Hamlet no longer wants to keep running from things. His attitude is simple. If something is going to happen, it will happen, and there's no point spending your whole life trying to avoid it. Before the duel begins, Hamlet approaches Laertes and apologizes. He says he never meant to kill Polonius or destroy his family, and that the terrible things he did happened while he was in that state of madness. Laertes outwardly accepts the apology, but he doesn't abandon the plan. The match begins, and at first Hamlet does even better than Claudius expected, scoring several hits against Laertes. The king offers him wine and secretly drops the poison he prepared into the cup, but Hamlet doesn't want to drink yet. Gertrude, having no idea the wine is poisoned, picks up the cup and drinks to her son's success. Claudius tries to stop her, but it's already too late. The fencing continues, and Laertes finally wounds Hamlet with the poisoned blade. In the struggle that follows, the two men exchange weapons, and now Hamlet wounds Laertes with the very same poisoned sword. Laertes has fallen into his own trap. Then Gertrude suddenly becomes ill, collapses, and manages to say that the wine was poisoned. Laertes realizes everything is over and decides there's no point hiding the truth anymore. He tells Hamlet that the blade is poisoned too, that both of them are going to die, and that Claudius is responsible for the entire plot. At that point, Hamlet stops hesitating. He turns on the king, wounds him with the poisoned weapon, and forces him to drink the remaining poisoned wine. Claudius dies. Before Laertes dies, he asks Hamlet for forgiveness and also forgive him for the deaths of Polonius and Ophelia. Hamlet can already feel the poison taking effect as well. Horatio tries to drink what remains of the poisoned wine so he can die beside his friend, but Hamlet stops him. He asks Horatio to stay alive and tell people what really happened, because after all this bloodshed and chaos, no one will understand who killed whom or why unless someone survives to explain it. At that moment, Fortinbras returns to the castle after his campaign in Poland. As Hamlet is dying, he says that Fortinbras should inherit the Danish throne. A few moments later, Hamlet dies. Fortinbras enters the hall and finds the royal family dead around him. Horatio promises to tell him the entire story, and Fortinbras orders that Hamlet be buried with military honors. As a man who, under different circumstances, might have made a worthy king, and that, basically, is the story of Hamlet. Put very simply, it's the story of a man who understands all too well how complicated, ugly, and uncertain everything around him is, and because of that, he finds it incredibly difficult to simply pick up a sword and kill someone. Hamlet isn't a coward, and he isn't weak, even if he can sometimes seem that way. His real problem is that he never stops thinking. He wants to be certain the ghost told the truth. He wants to know whether he even has the right to take revenge. He thinks about death, conscience, what comes after death, and while he is still trying to work all of that out in his head, events around him keep moving without him. Polonius is killed by accident, Ophelia loses her mind and dies, Laertes comes home looking for revenge, Claudius keeps planning more murders, and by the end almost everyone is dead. Claudius, by contrast, is much simpler when it comes to action. He wants the throne, so he kills his brother. Hamlet becomes dangerous, so he decides Hamlet needs to disappear. There's no endless moral debate going on inside his head, and that contrast is a huge part of what makes the tragedy work. Hamlet understands too much. Claudius acts too easily, and everyone else gets caught between them and slowly pulled into the disaster. That's also why the famous to be or not to be isn't only about suicide. In a way, the entire story keeps returning to the same question: do you endure what is happening, keep thinking, or finally act even when you can't control what happens afterward? And by the time Hamlet finally stops questioning every move and starts acting, there is almost no time left.